I'm excited to hear her talk about it. So anyway, Brenda, would you like to introduce our speaker, Laura?
Absolutely. We are so fortunate to have Laura Cantor Zelman, speak about the book that she wrote, In My Father's Words. And I'm going to read part of what was in the connector. I don't know if you saw it or not, and then just, let her take over. The book contains over 500 letters written by Milton Cantor, MD, detailing the daily life in the U.S. Army during World War II. These letters are a time capsule of the times that Dr. Cantor spent in Central America and Europe serving his country. They shed light on the conditions of soldiers' medical care at the time, the small joys that brought hope to those away from home, and the unabashed patriotism of a doctor doing his part to make sure America remained the land of the free. As Cantor writes home to his wife, he shares his thoughts on censorship, the Nazis, the German POWs, and the Army. He also discovers the true meaning of family, a wisdom that would lead him to become a better father and husband on his return. Really insightful letters, and Laura's going to tell us a lot more and going to show us some pictures. So we're so looking forward to it. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Brenda. And I'd like to give a special thank you to Ann Thomas for putting together my pictures into a slideshow. Thank you, Ann. I'm really happy, well, and thank you to the whole committee. I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk to you about my book, In My Father's Words, The World War II Letters of an Army Doctor. The letters are a time capsule of my dad's Army service years. For me, the letters were a journey of discovery. Here was my dad as a young man in the prime of his life. The letters took me inside his mind, almost like being a voyeur. His thoughts on the war, Army life, the Nazis, German and American POWs. His meditations on life, values, family, love, and freedom. At the end of my talk, I will answer any questions you might have. But let's begin at the beginning. How did the book come to be? Would you mind if I put this on speaker view? Would that help you all?
Yep. Speaker view. She needs to share screen. If she's going to
Well, let me see what happened. In 1990, no, I guess in 19. No, I don't know what happened.
If I may interject, I think if everyone goes to view in the right-hand corner top, you can put it on speaker view yourself.
You can.
Yeah, the right-hand side of your screen where it says view, just go to speaker view. And then you'll have a small gallery there, but that works.
It does.
Yeah,
Now we see you straight on.
you see me? Oh, okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
When you talk, we see you.
In 1990, my mom passed away. My three sisters and I had to clear out the Brooklyn apartment that she and my dad had lived in for over 20 years. While doing this, we found bags of letters just tucked away in a closet. The letters were from my dad, Milton Cantor, to my mom, Rose. We were grieving, we had lots to do, so I took the letters home and stored them in my basement. Not the best place to store paper you want to preserve. I was busy working, raising my family. We moved a few times, and so did the letters. Finally, in 2014, I decided to go through the bags. I sorted the letters out by date and discovered that they went from 1932 to 1937, Dad's medical school years, and 1941 to 45, the time he served in World War II as an Army doctor. I read all the letters, but decided to concentrate on the World War II ones. World War II changed the world on a global scale, but it also changed the life of every individual who served. For my father, it brought a realization of that which he had taken for granted and the importance of home and family. I have 529 World War II letters written to my mother. Perhaps there were more, I'll never know. I also have 3 written to me. One, a poignant letter Dad wrote as he was leaving to go overseas in case he didn't return. It was to be opened by me on my 18th birthday. Thankfully, he was there to give it to me. Another letter tries to explain to me, then 3 years old, why he must be away and can't play with me. As I read the letters, I journeyed with my father to the various places he was sent. Madison Barracks, Watertown, New York. Fort Dix, New Jersey. The Panama Canal Zone. Camp Carson, Colorado. Camp Forest, Tennessee. England, France, Belgium, Germany, and lastly, Czechoslovakia, before returning home 4.5 years later. At first, I thought are the letters with my family. It's part of their history. Through them, my sisters, their children and grandchildren could get to know their father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, respectively. But the more I worked on putting the letters into a readable form, the more I thought that others would be interested in them too. True, they are one man's thoughts and firsthand account of a global historical event. However, in many ways, my dad is every Army doctor who tries to save lives and heal wounds while surrounded by death and destruction. So the book was born after about 2 years of a labor of love. This is a quote from a letter. Please keep my letters carefully from now on, as someday I really hope to complete a book in diary form about my experiences. Milton Cantor, January 7th, 1942. Dad never got around to this, but his oldest daughter fulfilled his hope. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit about the hero of this book, letter writer, Dr. Milton Cantor. I suspect that my family's story is similar to that of many of yours. Dad was born in Minsk, Russia, the youngest in a family of 8. The family came to this country in ships as money for passage was earned. He arrived in America at the age of 6 in 1916. elementary school years were spent at a yeshiva, a Jewish religious school. Then it was on to a New York City public high school and college at the City College of New York. He always wanted to be a doctor. But when he graduated in 1932, he could not get into a US medical school, probably because of unwritten quotas for Jews at that time. He would not be deterred from his goal and finally gained admittance to the University of Graz in Austria. Since the courses were taught in German, he had to learn that language also. I often think how ironic that he studied medicine in Hitler's shadow. His fluency in Hebrew and German was a very valuable asset during his Army service years. Mom and Dad met in 1930. She encouraged his dream of becoming a doctor, even though it meant long periods of separation. Hence all the 1932 to 1937 letters I also have. Dad graduated from medical school in 1937, and they were married in 1938. However, the life they hoped to settle into took a very big detour. Hitler saw to that. Dad was an intern when Congress passed the U.S. Selective Service Training and Service Act, aka the draft, in September 1940. The U.S. was already gearing up. I do not know whether he was drafted or whether he enlisted, as his records were amongst those destroyed in a fire at the National Personnel Records Center in 1973. My gut feeling is that he enlisted. Dad was now officially in the Army, and the letters start coming. Letters were the prime means of communication then. Long distance was costly, and the lines to make a call were often long. His letters almost read like a novel, albeit a nonfiction one. They start out slowly on January 26, 1941. Dad is posted to Madison Barracks, way upstate in Watertown, New York. It's cold and icy and snows a lot. But Army life here isn't too bad. There isn't much physical training for the doctors. The social protocol on the post is very important. At formal dances, one must take a turn dancing with the commanding officer's wife, and one must visit the CO's home, the card, and only stay 15 minutes. Yes, his life was now regimented, but his first year in the Army wasn't difficult. After I was born, my mom and I were able to join him at both Madison Barracks and his next post, Fort Dix. Then came the date that will live in infamy. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and we were at war. Dad's unit was sent to the Panama Canal Zone, and from there on, life changed for the soldiers as well as the civilian population. The Panama Canal Zone wasn't too much of a hardship either, despite the bugs, weather, and tropical diseases. Well, at least I didn't think so. Dad was busy working in a station hospital, teaching classes, taking Spanish lessons, and doing some physical conditioning and military training. Back to the US in June of 43, Camp Carson, Colorado, Camp Forest, Tennessee. The medical and physical training intensified. In January 1944, my dad wrote home that the training before Pearl Harbor was a picnic in comparison to the drills his unit was going through now. Maneuvers, long marches, learning to set up an evacuation hospital quickly and in total darkness. Maneuvers are tough, but Dad realized that they also prepared one for real battles. In April of 44, the letters start coming from England as his unit prepares to receive the D-Day casualties from the Normandy beaches. The plot thickens along with the mud and casualties in France. The 109th Evacuation Hospital is always on the move following General Patton's Third Army. The heavy rains, cold, snow, and big German guns take a tremendous toll on the soldiers. Finally, the climax, May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe is declared. During the 2 months that he waited to return home, Dad tends to American soldiers who had been prisoners in what he called Nazi torture chambers. The story ends with the last letter home, July 8, 1945. Letters were a tremendous morale booster to both the soldiers and loved ones at home. The Army recognized this, and in order to move supplies, yet accommodate the tremendous volume of mail, a system called V-mail was instituted. Many of the letters were transposed onto microfilm, which looked like this. Now, can you all see this?
Hold it up.
See it okay? I had to read these with a magnifying glass. Other V-mail letters looked like this, one page. The page folded into itself so that you could see the address on the outside here. Some were regular letters of varying page lengths. The letters, both outgoing and incoming, were censored. Dad wrote 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes more, in an effort to keep my mom's spirits up and allay her fears for him. He wrote under all kinds of conditions, sitting on a helmet outside his tent at dusk, in the early morning shivering cold of a hospital field tent, and by candlelight in his tent. So what did my dad write about? What themes run through these letters? What I did was try to pull out from the letters the things that my dad wrote about most, which I called themes. The first one is patriotism. My father was an unabashed American patriot. He loved this country and was honored to serve its soldiers. Quote, "It seems that everybody else can enjoy their husbands, while yours is serving our V Corps. Well, honey, if it weren't for sacrifices, our country would be lost. And to me, she's worth anything I may be asked to do." March 23rd, 1942. Another quote, "America is a great country, the finest in the world. Let us make ourselves worthy of her." August 10th, 1944. He wrote often about service to and sacrifice for America. He bemoaned the fact that the pleasures of being with his family and watching his children grow had been denied to him. But he understood that he was part of a great army, struggling to make all such pleasures possible without fear of concentration camps or fascism. He believed that the nearest thing to death was to exist under Nazi tyranny. He understood that, like all military spouses, my mom was also making sacrifices, and he wanted her to be proud that together they were ensuring a better world for their children. On October 2nd, 1944,
Want to do gallery view?
he said,
Oh, Grandma.
"I have often remarked that I have given the best years of my life to the Army." During the World War II years, the country was mostly united around the war effort. However, there were those who criticized and complained about taxes and rationing. Dad had no patience for this, calling them damned squawkers who should be in the Army and see what soldiers go through. He had tremendous compassion for the frontline soldiers who had to be in foxholes for long periods of time, enduring wet and cold conditions. He treated their swollen and frostbitten feet and sick bodies. Excuse me 1 minute while I take a drink of water. Medicine was another thing. For a good part of the war, Dad was part of the 109th Evacuation Hospital. Their mission was to receive the casualties and sick from the combat areas, treat and stabilize them, and evacuate them as soon as possible. During heavy fighting, the casualties poured in. Quote, August 3rd, 1944. "It's a hard grind now, but we like it, as that's the work we're supposed to do and help our boys. I see all types of ghastly wounds on our men and the prisoners of war. The POWs were treated with the same care given to our soldiers. Our enemies were even given the precious antibiotic penicillin, which at the time was a new wonder drug. It helped to prevent wound infections. After a particularly hectic day, Dad wrote, August 23rd, 1944, quote, "So life goes on here. All the sweat and toil and blood of battle winding up here. It's rather ironical when only a few hours ago, Americans and Germans were killing each other and then lie side by side in our ambulances and wards. The Nazis, another theme. I mentioned that my father was fluent in German. Many times he was called upon to assist in interrogations of captured Nazis. Often he would question them as he was treating them. The letters contain interesting details of these conversations as to why they were fighting. Many said they had no choice. Others told him about Nazi atrocities. Dad had absolutely no sympathy for them. He was convinced that the poison Hitler had sown could only be removed by total destruction. Another theme I call life. The long, lonely, dark nights of war leave time for reflection and dreaming of what life will be like when the conflict is over. After a hectic day, Dad would often retreat into his private dream world, his blue heaven, if any of you remember that song, and think about home and family, about how he missed my mother and how he wanted to make life better for her and their children. Through his writings, I saw him grow in wisdom, recognizing the values that are truly important in life. He contemplates the difference between existing and truly living and resolves to be a better, more caring husband. So after I finished reading the letters, I thought a lot about how my father got through this hellish war. The first thing I notice, I call the we, W-E, factor. Dad rarely says, I think or I did. Instead, the letters read, we all think, whatever it was they were thinking, or we went here, or we don't know. Dad made good friends. There was such a sense of camaraderie between them, a feeling that we are in this together, we will support each other, and we will get through it together. They shared personal thoughts and family stories, in addition to living quarters and food from home. I wondered if Dad ever had this degree of male bonding again. His faith community, another way of getting through the war. I think connecting with the Jewish community was a great source of comfort to my father. Wherever he was stationed, he sought out the Jewish community. I was surprised at how active the JWB, the Jewish Welfare Board, was in ministering not only to the Jewish soldiers, but also to soldiers of other faiths. The Army often provided transportation to Sabbath services, and the Jewish temple members opened their hearts and homes to the services. In Panama, the JWB provided a rabbi who traveled in the area and conducted services. They organized Passover seders and other holiday meals. Even when Dad was crossing the Atlantic on his way to England, the JWB provided matzahs, wine, and Haggadahs, books, for a Passover Seder. I mentioned earlier my dad's proficiency in Hebrew. Many times when there was no rabbi available, he conducted services for the men, and clergy of other faiths gave the sermon. There was a lot of interfaith cooperation between the chaplains. In addition to news from home, food packages were of prime importance, especially those containing kosher salami. The packages were often 6 weeks in transit, so salamis often arrived covered in green mold. No matter, my dad was the salami expert and could usually get them to an edible state by washing them in vinegar. When the salamis were deemed ready for consumption, feasts were held in their tents. Salamis were so important in the letters that one of my sons thought the book should be called The Salami Journals. I still remember the salamis that hung by a string in our Brooklyn apartment. And
I have a spring, I think she said, in the Brooklyn apartment.
if this says,
And there's some-
send a salami to your boy in the army. This sign still hangs in Katz's Delicatessen on the east side of New York. The Red Cross also gave out packages. In addition to candy and gum, they usually contain cigarettes donated by U.S. tobacco firms. I thought, what a way to get a population hooked on smoking. Humor, another way of making it through the war. Despite the life and death matters they dealt with, or maybe because of that, Dad and his buddies found relief in laughing at some of the ridiculous situations they found themselves in. There's an image of my dignified dad and his tent mates splashing around their flooded out tent in France and laughing hysterically like little boys at play. Faith in the future. Lastly, I think Dad had faith that this conflict would come to an end. He hoped sooner rather than later, that his present situation would not last indefinitely. He believed that he was part of something greater than himself, doing his part to free the world from Nazi tyranny. The letters touch on so many facets of World War II. I could only give you a brief smattering in this talk. I wish I had questioned my dad more when he was alive. For example, he knew about the Nazi concentration camps. He was told by the French that the Jews had been sent away. But did he have any idea as to the horrific nature and extent of the Nazis' atrocities? Despite the calm demeanor he presented in the letters, was he afraid? Or was this just for my mother's sake? I know he took an oath to first do no harm. But how does one put aside his hatred of the Nazis and take care of their medical needs? My father was a hero to me, but he would not have viewed himself as such. I think he thought of himself as an ordinary man thrust into an extraordinary war. He did not say, why me? But instead Why not me? Maybe heroes are those who quietly go about doing their best under difficult conditions. I will leave you with this quote from an October 2nd, 1944 letter. A new day is dawning. It may perhaps not appear too near, yet it surely is not far off. When that day will break, it'll find us hand in hand, facing people proudly. When we'll look into the free and happy faces of children, we'll think our sacrifices were worth all this. My family is so thankful that Dad was one of the lucky ones who came home. He was an old-fashioned doctor who did not work by appointment and made house calls. He loved being a physician and was still practicing medicine when he passed away suddenly at the age of 74. His 4 daughters were his pride and joy, and he would probably say that his proudest achievement was that he played a small part in helping to make a better world for them. So now I'd like to show you some photos. Normally, when I speak, I have a display board with photos and some other things, but we will have to make do with these. So if Ann Thomas could put the photos up.
Do you see them?
Not yet. We just see
Not
the
yet.
Oh, I have
torch
to,
logo.
how about now?
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so this is my dad when he first entered the Army.
He looks so young, Laura.
Well, he would have been 30, 31 actually.
He looks like he's about 20.
Wait till you see at the end of the war.
Oh.
Okay, the next photo, please. This is my dad and I don't know who in Camp Carson, Colorado. Okay, next. And this is my dad also, I believe, on maneuvers in Camp Carson.
Oh, that's dark.
That's me in a little uniform that my dad sent.
Cute.
Next. And that is my dad after he'd been in the Army for a while. And judging by the license plate on the car, I think he was on furlough in Florida. Okay. And that is my mom, dad, and me. Okay. And that is the 109th Evacuation Hospital in Duncourt, France. And it's hard to see, but it rained a lot. And a lot of times the tents were flooded out. Okay. That's my dad and some of his buddies in Metz, France, outside a church that obviously had taken bombs or was damaged in some way.
Holes in the roof.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's just, I think this postcard that my dad sent me
Loves you very
uh,
much.
was
Oh,
just so sweet.
You.
yes.
Oh,
This is 1944. And in the, I think you can't see it, but in the upper right-hand corner, it just says somewhere in France. And they were not supposed to give their locations.
mm,
And this is Frankfurt, Germany in March of 45. Obviously, a tremendous amount of bomb damage.
How you clean up a country after a war, talked about.
This is the officers of the 109th Evacuation Hospital. My dad is in the second row, third from the, well, it's my left. So, right, yes. And this is Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, where he ended the war.
Yeah, wonder if she was there with Link. Wonder if he was there. Show somebody ought to tell her about Link.
Yeah, I don't know. If I'd be happy to answer. Oh, there's, I guess there's one more slide. If anybody is interested, I do have copies of the book at home. It's available on Amazon, but I would be happy to ship anybody a copy. And if you want it signed, just tell me who you want it signed to. And there's all my information.
Anybody have any questions? You can unmute your microphone if you want and ask Laura a question.
I'm gonna tell her about Link.
So Laura, what year did he come home? Was it 1945 or 46?
45. He came home
45.
in July of 1945.
Yeah. So my father came home in 46, I believe. He was in some of the same places.
Well, you had to have enough battle, you had to have enough points. The Army discharged by the number of points you had.
Right.
And at that point in July, he already had more points than he needed to come.
I'm sure.
I have a question, Laura. Was he afraid to be over in, especially in France when the fighting was still going on, and he started hearing the horrible stories about the concentration camps and about being Jewish? The reason I'm asking is one of my father's best friends was Jewish, and my dad told us that they told him that if he ever got captured, he was supposed to take his dog tags off and throw them as far away as he possibly could, so that they wouldn't know that he was Jewish if he got captured. So I just always remember that story. So I'm just wondering, was your dad ever afraid as he heard those horrible stories, and here he is in France when the battle was still going on, feeling possibly awfully vulnerable?
He never put that in his letters, but I know that he was told the same thing. Tear off your dog tags and throw them away.
Yep.
And apparently there was some hierarchy of treatment in German prisons where if you were Russian or some of the Slavic people, they were treated very badly. They were looked upon as slaves. And then the Jews were treated terribly if they were captured and they found out that you were Jewish.
Mm.
And it would be amazing compassion to be treating wounded German soldiers, understanding the situation. I mean, it's one thing to treat an enemy, but then when you hear of the horrible atrocity, I mean, that to me is just above and beyond his compassion and his saintliness almost to be okay with treating them. It's really quite amazing.
It's your job to heal them.
Well, I think he took an oath to treat and heal. And as much as he would not have, I'm sure, wanted to treat Germans, he did. They even at times treated civilians. You know, they would sometimes come to the hospital and, you know, a woman might be in labor and having a difficult time, and they would treat them.
Laura, did he talk about the war very much after he came back for when he was older?
Not really. He told some stories, but I think, and maybe my sisters could chime in, you know, as a child and then a teenager, when you're a teenager, you know, you don't want to hear dad's war stories.
I know. I heard them too.
Kind of tune them out. And, you know, I wish that I had, as I said, asked more questions. But I just didn't think to ask them. I was very preoccupied.
Right.
You know, with school, with social life. I recently came into possession.
The teenager.
The funny thing, when you publish a book, you hear from people all over. I did get an email the other day from somebody from Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, who was just so grateful that the Americans had been there and saved their place, and telling me that another person in the 109th unit had married a woman from Czechoslovakia and brought her here. And that woman contacted me through the person in Czechoslovakia, and we've been in contact. And I just got it a few days ago, sent me a memoir that had been put together for the 109th hospital. And in reading that, I was really astonished. It was in such detail, every battle, casualties. I had no idea, because my father never let on in letters. Maybe once or twice he talked about bombs going over the hospital, but they were right behind the front lines. At one point, they were somehow behind enemy lines, and they faced danger very, very often. So I'm glad in a way that my mother didn't know that at the time. Maybe he told her when he came home.
Laura, I have another question. I know when my father wrote letters and my mother had them, there were big sections that were blacked out because, of course, my father was revealing things that he shouldn't have. Did you get any letters like that where he he was probably more aware because my father was not as educated as your father, and he you know, obviously you couldn't reveal anything about the war or where they were.
As a doctor, my father was an officer, and officers had to take turns censoring letters. So my father knew what
He
not
knew.
to write.
Right.
And in
Knew
fact,
what not to say.
one letter to my mother sent from Panama, he says, "We can't tell you where we are." I mean, she knew he was in Panama. "We can't write about the climate. We can't, you know," the list went on. He said, "I don't know what to write to you anymore."
I'm alive.
But
Yeah.
he also said, "You would not believe what soldiers put in letters. Sometimes they're writing the same things to different women, you know."
Jeez.
Possibly.
So his letters, they're very few cross-outs.
Laura?
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just like to ask, have you traveled in Europe to any of the locations that your father described, either where he went to school or later where he was in the war?
We have traveled in Europe, but not, unfortunately, to any of the locations that he was at. A couple of years ago, somebody emailed me who had read the book, whose dad had followed a very similar route to the 109th and was probably treated in the 109th. And we met, and he showed me a map where the hospital was in this particular location in France, and where his father had been shot and then taken to the hospital. And there were a lot of farms there, but yeah, he had papers with him, and you know, it was a very interesting meeting. As I said, you publish a book and you never know who comes out of the woodwork. So I've learned a lot just by other people
Be fun to get.
filling in
Link.
facts.
You might enjoy
Because when I was putting the book together and doing some research on the 109th, I couldn't find very much. The unit was disbanded in 1946.
My father was in Panama too, in the Second World War, and I went there I went on a cruise and went through the canal. But we got out and walked around and looked, and it is hot. It's hot and humid and muggy, and your dad was right.
Well, they treated all kinds of tropical diseases.
Yeah, malaria was a big one.
Yeah.
My dad never got sick, so I don't think he ever met your father. And in that case, that was good.
That's right. But,
She
you
said,
know,
I believe she said
I don't
that.
think so.
I think so. Can
my
you
father,
Anybody else have a question?
just tell me that?
No one? Thank you, Laura. It was
Thank
wonderful.
you, Laura.
You
Yeah,
are so lucky to have such wonderful letters and such insight
Yeah.
into your father. I mean, that's a treasure that most people never have.
it's
Wow.
a wonderful memory, and for my sisters and, you know, our whole family. But
It
thank
really
you.
is. It really is. Well,
Thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank
It
you
was
so
wonderful.
much,
Thank
Laura,
you.
for agreeing to be our speaker. Thank you.
yes, we really enjoyed it. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. And the book, I highly recommend it. I have the book, and it very, very, very interesting. you really get insight into his personality and his sacrifice, and what a wonderful man your father was. And I'm sure he saw all kinds of atrocious things that he didn't want to scare your mother, you know, by telling her too many. But I mean, you can imagine the wounds and things that the man treated. It was just really quite amazing. So anyway, I highly recommend the book. Thank you so much, Laura. We appreciate it.
Hello to my sisters, my granddaughter.
Oh, wow. Very nice. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Laura, this is Ann Thomas. I have recorded the talk, and with your permission, I will post it on YouTube.
That's fine.
Okay, and I'll let you know where it is.
Okay.
Take care. Stay
appreciate-
safe.
Everybody, yes, stay healthy.
Thank you very
Really,
much, Laura. That was
really.
very